right, so I'll introduce myself. I'm Christian Moore, and you'll see a little bit more about me here in a minute in a little clip, but I'm the founder of the WhyTry organization. WhyTry, we've been around now for 27 years. Um, we're in about 30,000 schools, and we work with over 3 million students across the United States. So we're one of the largest social and emotional, mental health programs out there. I've traveled 7 million miles to all 50 states, and that's been an amazing education and journey, going 7 million miles around the planet advocating for students and kids are really struggling. And so I promise you, I understand the family issues, the mental health challenges out there right now. It's not an easy time. It's a really rough time. I still think there's not been a lot of recovery from a mental health standpoint coming out of COVID still. That's been a tremendous challenge. I'm also the author of the book, The Resilience Breakthrough. I hope a few of you out there are familiar with The Resilience Breakthrough. A few of you have read it. I just talked to our publisher the other day. We just reached over 100,000 people. We have over 100,000 copies in print. I just learned out there. So I never imagined that would happen. So today I want to take you on a journey of resilience. I want to talk about where resilience comes from internally. I spent many years teaching skills of resilience, and then many educators just started asking me, hey, where does resilience come from? I mean, I wish we could give someone a prescription for resilience. So if you're interested in a prescription for resilience, I promise you've come to the right place today. I want to start out though talking about one of the most important things in being resilient, because resilience is the ability to bounce back. You have to have something to bounce back from. So when people always say to me, what's the number one thing a person has to have to be resilient? I get that question a lot because, a lot of people don't want to read an entire book. So they'll say, hey, Christian, just cut to it. What's the most important thing? And I always tell them, the key ingredient to being resilient is you have to have suffering. You have to have something to bounce back from. And we all know there's no shortage of trauma, suffering out there. It's the human condition. I've been on this earth for, 54 years. There's never been a time in my life that I haven't had some type of difficulty or opposition. So I'm going to walk you through a model of resilience. Again, that first step is suffering. I'm gonna give you a little, I don't usually jump into that second step, but I'm gonna give you a little hint. That second step is the ability to flip the switch, is the ability to see that suffering as a resource. I call that flipping the switch. So those are the first two steps. And that second step really starts with a question. After you have suffering, you're going to have negative emotions. You're going to have all kinds of emotions. And you have to ask yourself, how am I going to use these emotions in ways that are productive, in ways that help myself and others, in ways that do no more damage? And so that's one of the key ingredients to being resilient is that second question there. So there you go. You got the first two right out of the gate. I don't normally do that, but here you go. You got the first two right there. And then I want to take you guys on my own suffering journey a little bit. I want to start with a quick video clip just showing the human condition of suffering. It's interesting when I'm speaking in front of like an audience of 2,000 people, and I'll say, is anybody here dealing with any type of suffering, opposition? You'll see 3 or 4 hands go up, because I think we've been socialized that something's wrong with us if we have trauma or we have suffering. Where I want to really emphasize today is the complete opposite. It is as normal as breathing in oxygen. It's as normal as drinking water. To have difficulty or suffering is a very human experience. So just to illustrate this human experience, I want to play this quick clip here. Again, I've been on this earth for, 54 years. There's never been a time in my life, I haven't had that difficulty. I haven't had that challenge. I haven't had that suffering. So, it's as normal as breathing. Um, One of my first challenges in life became academic challenges. I was a special education student. I failed the first grade. I was illiterate when I was 17 years old, and so school was not an easy place for me. And it's interesting the fact that I've spent 27 years visiting schools, literally going 7 million miles visiting schools. The irony of that is unbelievable. But just to start out, I want to share with you my own life journey a little bit. I used to always verbally tell my story, and then one day, when my therapist said, "Hey, Christian, when you tell your trauma over and over again, you might want to put that in a video clip." So about 2 years ago, we put that in a quick video. So here, let me play that for you here. Here we go. Pull this up here. I grew up in between Baltimore and DC in a family of 12 kids, 5 brothers, 6 sisters. Both my parents had some mental health challenges. My mom had social phobia, generalized anxiety disorder, had a fear of leaving the house. You have to leave the house to go get food, so there wasn't a lot of food to eat sometimes in my house growing up. Don't tell anyone, but my dad was one of the highest level code breakers at the National Security Agency. You could give my dad any mathematical problem and he could instantly rattle it off the top of his head. My dad was autistic. He was a genius, but he had very little common sense or social skills. If you've ever seen that movie, A Beautiful Mind, you've met my dad. So having 2 parents with some mental health challenges put me in a situation where I ended up being a street kid. I could hang out till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning on a school night, had very few rules, very few boundaries. One night, I was out late at night and a car pulls up and I hear a voice. And the voice I hear is the voice of a woman who I endearingly call Mama Jackson. It was one of my best friend's moms who sees me out there, late at night.
Christian had so many obstacles that was going on in his home.
She knows what I'm out there doing, and she says, "Look, don't you ever set foot on a property. I'm gonna call the school tomorrow. I'm gonna make sure you're not in any of Sean's classes." I remember thinking to myself, dang, I know I'm bad, but I'm not that bad. I can never go to school with him ever again.
When you see a child that's hungry, there's no happiness there. You're thinking about what other kids have that they don't have, okay? But when you see a child that's hungry and you give that child some food, you see that child's disposition change.
Going to school was very difficult for me. As a child, I was diagnosed with ADHD, conduct disorder, and severe learning disabilities. When I was sitting in a classroom, oftentimes, I was embarrassed. When I got called out loud, I would act up and get in trouble instead of embarrassing myself because I didn't know how to read or didn't know how to do basic math. So, for me, it was like going to the doctor's office every day, going to school. I had a hard time telling time. When I was even 17 years old, I couldn't tell time on a hand clock. To me, 4:45 equals 25 minutes to 5, but they tell me a quarter's 15. But how could a quarter not equal 25?
When we concentrate on that more to make sure that a child's needs are provided for, then that child will thrive. I know that I'm loved, and I know that this person is going to feed me to make sure I have what I need.
Mama Jackson took over and said, "Look, if you start going to school every day, I want to see your report cards. If you start answering to me, you can come eat in our house anytime you want." Now, Mama Jackson was a seriously, seriously good cook. That's one of the reasons why I'm in top physical condition right now. But anyways, I was very blessed to have Mama Jackson come into my life. It was kind of an informal foster care situation. She took over and really started giving me skills of resilience. It had a huge impact on my life. And I'm excited to share with you all the different skills and strategies that Mama Jackson gave me to help me become resilient.
One of his teachers in high school said to him that he would never go to college. Christian went to college.
Growing up in between DC and Baltimore, I saw many social problems in my community, in my neighborhood. You know, I saw poverty, I saw hopelessness at times. I even saw some violence. But I remember walking to school one morning and literally seeing one of my best friends evicted from his house. His furniture was all throughout his front yard. I could see the heartbreak in his eyes, his parents' eyes, and I knew in that moment I wanted to be a social worker. And I knew I could not become a social worker unless I went to college. You know, but I was told college was probably not going to be an option for me with a 6th grade math level, a 7th grade reading and writing level. You know, statistically, I had a better chance of playing the NBA and becoming LeBron James.
His experience was at the other side of the track. Life was different. Life was unique. And the kids like that, they have to survive.
I struggled getting through college math. You know, college math is a requirement to make it through school. I remember that feeling in my stomach when I knew I couldn't graduate.
They're not going to let me graduate because I can't do math. I can't count money, I can't numbers, I get confused and all of these things. He was like a bobcat in a cage.
So I came up with something called the No F game plan. And this was a strategy that I used to make it through school with my learning differences.
He made himself big. He made himself known to others. I'm here. Hey, I may not have what you have, but I have a street smart.
I would go to every class. I would sit on the front row. I would do all the homework assignments. And I would do enough extra credit to get a D-. I would shoot for A's, but I learned in college you get just as much credit with a D-.
And his paper is not polished. Other students get an A. Christian gets B, sometimes a C. But he has ideas. He has a substance. And the WhyTry program that he ran with and helped incredible number of students and the teachers and administrators came out of a classwork.
He created an environment to teach teachers how to really deal with students that may have significant functional limitations.
I persevered. Luckily, I knew what resilience was. I knew how to take my academic challenges and use them as a reason to knock down barriers, to focus on what was right with me, not what was wrong with me.
The vision of WhyTry, and I think this thing is called the roller coaster ride. And I'm so glad that when he fell off of that roller coaster, that he got back on.
Dr. Virgil Wood, civil rights icon and close friend to Dr. Martin Luther King, learned about WhyTry's impact and decided to honor Mama Jackson with the National Rosa Parks Save the Children Award. Mama Jackson gave me a safe and loving environment so I could thrive. She didn't get rid of my problems at home, at school, in my neighborhood. She showed me how to use those problems as a fuel source to put one foot in front of another and create a productive outcome with the opposition. Despite my many challenges, I was able to get a master's degree with a 6th grade math level and a 7th grade reading and writing level and become a licensed clinical social worker. As a social worker, I was able to see the challenges that I faced growing up from a completely new perspective. I turned these insights into a program to help students reliably answer the question, why try? In this process, I discovered 4 powerful sources of resilience. I want to share those insights with you today. As you can see, I had some incredible mentors and incredible people come into my life. I remember my 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. Chambers, on Martin Luther King's birthday would light a candle And then, she would show us some of the video clips, talk to us about that history. I remember being, as a kid, really moved by that, inspired by that, his work, and also the pain and stuff. And one day, if you would have told me I'd get to be even close friends with one of Dr. King's close friends, and see Mama Jackson get the Rosa Parks Award, I would have said there's a better chance of me landing on the moon. It was just crazy that how life kind of came together. So again, I have a huge debt to pay because of the mentoring and resources I got access to. When you see something have a little bit of impact, you don't do it on an island, and you can't see this right now, but there's an army of people standing behind me, and that's what enabled us to reach these 3 million students. So long story short, a professor, Dr. Mike Seipel, comes to me and says, look, Christian, he's one of the leading experts in poverty in the country, out of Cornell University. He says, hey, just do me a favor, write down for me on a piece of paper, how did you do this? How did you make it this far in school with your background and your learning differences? So I wrote down a few principles on a piece of paper. I wrote down I had to stop crashing. I had to realize my decisions had consequences. You heard Mama Jackson talking about that roller coaster where she got emotional a little bit. And that's this picture right here. And this just shows the ups and downs of life, the human condition. You start out with those challenges. And I'll say to the students, what are your challenges at home, at school, with peers? A lot of times, because of these challenges, we do some things that get us into trouble. Those are the things that are at the top of that right. It could be skipping school, doing drugs, stealing, fighting, run away. It could be not turning in my homework, talking during class. If I'm doing this with a third grade, I didn't share my scissors. And we actually do this all the way up to death row. So we actually teach these skills K through death row, from the playpen to the state pen. And the reason why we're able to teach this that wide of a gamut is because if they learn visually, we teach them visually. If they learn auditorily, we teach them auditory. Body kinesthetic. I said, okay, I'm going to take the most evidence-based mental health practice, and I'm going to deliver it in a visual delivery system. A school psychologist showed me that 80% of the kids I'm working with are visual learners. But I spent 8 years in college learning how to do verbal cognitive talk intervention with these students. And when I saw that these kids learn visually, I said, all right, I'm an artist. A lot of kids with my background with learning disabilities, I could do art. So I just started hand drawing everything in counseling. This is the first picture I started drawing, was this picture of this roller coaster. And again, at the top of the hill there is what gets them into trouble. I'll say, so what's the consequence of skipping school? The crash is there at the bottom is I had to go to in-school suspension. What's the reality of using drugs? A kid I was working with the other day in Los Angeles saw his brother get killed. It was death. What's the reality of fighting? I got suspended. The loop represents the problems they keep doing over and over again. And I'll say, you're in this loop is when your head hits the pillow at night, you feel frustrated, you feel confused, you feel angry, you feel like giving up. That means you're in that loop. My job is to get you out of that loop. So over the next couple of weeks, part of this counseling process, this change process, while you're in my classroom, whatever the setting is, I'm going to show you how to get out of that loop right there and how to get on that other track to opportunity, freedom, self-respect. The name of our program is WhyTry, because 27 years ago, I just started asking kids, why try? Why should you turn in your homework, stay in school, make better decisions? They would say, I don't know, Mr. Moore, I don't know. And it hit me. I could have the greatest interventions in the world, but if the child does not know the answer to the question, why try, they're going to put very little effort in. But I believe that answer is, if you try in life, you'll have more opportunity, you'll have more freedom, and you'll have more self-respect. That's what comes when you can truly answer that question, why try? So to get on that track to opportunity, freedom, self-respect, I had to tear off these labels. I had all these labels right here growing up: failure, druggie, learning disabled, dumb, lazy, rebellious, attitude problem. So I had to tear off my labels. Every question that the teacher or the counselor asks the student is written around the visual metaphor. The next one I had to apply is I had to learn how to control my defense mechanisms. We all know a defense mechanism is a bulletproof vest for our feelings. It's how we protect ourselves in a pressure situation. I'm using hundreds of defense mechanisms right now. I'm probably talking a little bit too fast. I just because I know a lot of you out there don't know me, so I'm kind of insecure. So I'm like, oh yeah, why try? We're in all 50 states, 30,000 schools. That's a defense mechanism. That's me screaming, hey, what I have has value. Please listen to me. And we constantly use defense mechanisms. All of us use hundreds of them all day long. And some of them are productive and some of them can really do harm, can hurt ourselves, hurt other people. And for example, when I was in school, the teacher would say, Christian, turn to page 130 and read out loud. I didn't know how to read, so I say F you to the teacher, punch the kid next to me, because I'd much rather be sent to the principal's office for acting out behaviorally than having everybody laughing at me because I don't know how to read. Now I realize, why was I doing that? I had no control of my defense mechanisms. The next picture here is what I call the motivation formula. I look at life's problems being like water. Water can flood and do damage, or water can be channeled through dams and create electricity. This is a bottle of water, by the way. So too much water, too much water again can cause flooding, can kill us. But we have to drink enough water to stay alive. I think our bodies are like 90% water, right? So it's our best friend, our worst enemy. And I look at opposition, difficulty, suffering, trauma the same way. It's either going to be the worst thing that happened to you, or that maturity is going to kick in. You're either going to use it or it's going to use you. We know that when we really study trauma. And so you have a challenge. The first thing we want them to do with that water, that challenge, is we want it to channel it through that first dam. And that's the choice to use positive self-talk. And we want them to focus their self-talk on what they have control over. I don't have any control over if anybody out there likes what I'm saying in this presentation, but I have complete control over the effort I'm going to communicate it. That's one of the most liberating things in the world, is to focus on what you control. Because most of the stuff around me, I don't control. I don't control other human beings. I don't control the weather. I don't even know what I control. I don't have a lot of control over most things except me. And even that, I don't have complete control over. I try to keep myself, under control, but it is a challenge. Okay. And then I believe the next place that we can tap into motivation, if everybody out there wants to point to themselves, if you point to yourself, oftentimes people are pointing right here. And I believe motivation does not take place here. My brain tells me my flaws, my weaknesses. It will chew me up, spit me out, and eat me for dinner again, right? The biggest war we fight is between our own ears. But when I say to 2,000 people in the audience, point to yourself, most people point right here. And that's that character and heart. And that means you go through the motions, you don't give up out of respect for other people who care about you and who you care about. And then we want them to tap into that third dam there, a passion, purpose, and interest, whatever that is, man. If you don't have a passion to get out of bed, life is way harder. There's got to be something that just pulls you out of those sheets in the morning, where you have a passion, purpose, or interest. And I think we all have a passion to reach youth and families that are struggling. I think, that's why we're all here together right now. We all have that. And because of that, hopefully we're a support system to one another. I'm feeling more connected in the universe, in the world today, because of this passion, purpose, or interest. And that leads that fourth dam, a support system. So a little different approach is, we don't get rid of the challenge. We take the challenge and we channel it through these dams. Just like water can be used to create electricity, we look at life's problems the same way. Those problems can be channeled, and that trauma can be channeled, and you can create powerful, powerful energy to create change. But you got to give the child the specific tools. It's one thing that you can't talk about that theoretically. You got to give them the direct tools on how to tap into those four dams right there. This is a tribute to my home state of Maryland. If you put a bunch of live crabs in a pot, if you don't put a lid on the pot, why can't the crabs get out of the pot? The kids will say, well, duh, the other crabs are reaching up and pulling them down. So I'll say, hey, your friends you're skipping school with, you're doing drugs with, fighting with, all they're doing is they're pulling you down. They're keeping you in the pot. And you can see every question that the teacher, the counselor asks the student is written around the visual metaphor. What are the reasons for staying in this pot? What will my future be like if I don't get out of this pot? What will my future be like when I get out of this pot? Warning at the bottom there, that warning. If you try to get out, you will be attacked. I don't know about you all, but the more good you try to do in this world, the more you'll be attacked. If everybody likes what you're saying and doing, you're not doing enough for kids. You have to push the envelope. If you're advocating for children and the elderly, those are our two most vulnerable populations in this country. We have got to knock down doors for those populations. So again, we put over 3 million kids through that picture right there. We've never had a child K through 12th grade go, I don't get that picture. Being someone with severe learning disabilities, I hate complexity. I like simplicity. And so one thing I'm proud of is kids are not confused by what we're doing. The child visually sees it, We reinforce it with music they listen to, and then we have discussion questions that tie into the music. And then we have a lot of art activities, physical activities. I'll say, draw me a picture of what life is like when you're in this pot. Draw me a picture of what life would be like if you got out of this pot, or when you get out of this pot. Write poetry about that, create a rap song about that, create a skit about that. We use as much of the arts as we possibly can to reinforce these pictures. One thing I like about that, kids will say to me, man, when you taught me this picture, I wasn't ready for it. But by the time we do the physical activity, the art activities, and Cam will go through, these are very robust lesson plans. I'm barely hitting the surface. And but they don't forget it. After they go through it, they're like, man, after we did the art activities, the music, everything, man, I will never forget these metaphors. I've even run into people 20 years later that will walk by me and go, I finally got out of the pot. I'll never forget that picture of the crabs in the pot 20 years later. It's unbelievable. Um, this is kind of interesting. This is a maze. It takes them 20 minutes to get through this maze. I'll say, to get through this maze, you had to have the desire to do it. You had to put the time in. You had to put the effort in. For my Washington Commanders to win the Super Bowl next year, we're coming back, I promise you. But for my Washington Commanders to win the Super Bowl, they have to have the desire to do it. They have to put the time in. They have to put the effort in. And then they'll experience something what I call the accomplishment zone. When the student is at the top of that T, they're just about to finish the T in effort, will snag it out of their hand. And they'll say, Mr. Moore, I've been working on this maze for 20 minutes, man. Come on, let me finish my maze. And I'll say, why do you need to finish that maze? And they'll always say, I've been working at it. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes I'm struggling, trying to get through this thing. And I'll say, what you're experiencing right now is the accomplishment zone. That's the same feeling you'll feel when they hand you your high school diploma. That's the same feeling you'll feel when your favorite team wins the World Series or the Super Bowl. Because to accomplish anything in this world, you have to have the desire to do it. You have to put the time in. And if you put all your effort in, that's what makes a difference. Those three things: desire, time, and effort. For example, in 15 minutes or so, when I'm done this workshop, I'm going to experience the accomplishment zone because I have the desire to share the speech. I'm putting the time in and I'm trying 110%. You cannot not experience the accomplishment zone when you apply desire, time, and effort, but you've got to sincerely apply it with all that heart. And then they have to live society's laws and rules. Now, as a child, I was diagnosed with conduct disorder. I hate laws and rules. So with this picture, I say to kids, you know anything strange about this weightlifter right here? And they'll go, well, he's kind of buff on one side. He looks like you, Christian, on the other side is kind of weak. I'll say, okay, what's happening? You're pushing up on the weight. What's the weight doing? They're like, well, duh, it's going up. And I'll say, as it's going up, it's also coming back down. And it tears the cells. It tears the fibers and the muscles as you push up against that weight. It tears those fibers. And then they rebuild. And then they get stronger and stronger and stronger. And I say to them, hey, your weight, your resistance are all these laws and rules you hate, which I should have shared in the beginning of this metaphor. I have them write down all the laws and rules they hate. Sometimes I'll fill out the whole back of the piece of paper with all the laws and rules they hate. And then I'll say, the balloon represents skipping school, doing drugs, stealing, fighting, running away. There's no resistance from that balloon. Anybody can lift that balloon. And these guys, especially these more hardcore kids, they don't want to do the weak or easy thing. And I'll say it takes no strength, it takes no maturity, it takes no backbone to lift the balloon. But to be mature, to be a great woman, a great man, a great human being, you got to lift that weight. So at the end of the hour, I'll say to the student, what does that picture right there teach? And they'll say, man, the reason why I have all F's, the reason why I'm being kicked out of class, I'm not lifting that resistance. I'm not lifting that weight. And I just tell them, hey, it's the truth. And I've never had any child argue with me about this picture, because for years as a social worker, I would talk to them about following laws and rules. They hate laws and rules. But with this picture, it's just a true principle. You have to lift that resistance to become stronger. And so you'll get no pushback from them on that. And then they've got to get plugged into at least 3 support systems. When I first work with children, they usually have 1 or less of these: a parent or caregiver, a positive friend, teacher, counselor, school official, a positive mentor, or something that inspires and motivates them to do good. I want them to at least get plugged into at least 3 of these. One of the good things that has come from COVID, maybe the only good thing I know of, is the debate about social support systems is completely over. For years, I would travel and people would go, "Hey, Christian, no, there are other things more important than relationships." And I'm like, well, 80% of change in a child's life is going to come from a relationship. I kept seeing this data and I'd get all this pushback. And again, they would say, that's this bleeding heart social worker, Christians being too relationship based. And then a beautiful thing happened when COVID hit. We did a worldwide study on what happens when you put people in isolation. You know what happens when you put people in isolation? Anxiety just passed up depression is the number one mental health disorder. You know, when I speak to large audiences, I'll say, anybody here dealing with dread when they wake up in the morning? Is anybody here dealing with anxiety? 60 to 70% of that audience will raise their hand when I ask them about anxiety. So if you're feeling anxiety, I promise you, you're part of the majority. Most people, when they wake up in the morning, the first thing they're experiencing is dread. We have never seen that at this level right now in human history. Something is going on. And again, one of the good things that has shaken out of COVID is the debate is over. We're social creatures and we know the mental health outcomes when people are in isolation. So again, and I hope we never have to do a worldwide study ever again to prove that, but that is one of the real positive things that came out of this. No one's debating that no more. The data is clear. And the last picture sums it up. When we first work with many students are standing right here next to this wall, but our goal is they learn how to stop crashing, tear off their labels and so on. They can get on top of that wall. And so how we've gotten this in over 30,000 schools is we look at the students' GPA and test scores before they go through these skills and their GPA and test scores after they go through these skills. And then we say, hey, this is why we need to spend more time on that. And that's kind of how we landed and expanded in many school systems across the country. So again, we have these 10 visual metaphors reinforced with music, physical activities. Now, these are skills of resilience. Everything I've shared with you thus far are specific skills that enable you to deal with trauma, that increases your resilience. And again, we put several million students through these pictures. I'll be very frank with you guys. We succeeded with many of these kids and we failed with far too many of these students. And thousands of educators started asking me, hey, Christian, kids get your visual metaphors, the reality ride, tearing off labels. Look, we know they get it. They like the music. We get it. The kids get it. We get it. But why is one student motivated to stop crashing, to climb out of this pot right here, and another student isn't? Where's the inner motivation come from? You know, to build these support systems, to lift these laws and rules, to work hard, to, you know, learn these problem solving skills, to deal with peer pressure. Where do they learn? I mean, where does the motivation come from to control your defense mechanisms? You know, I saw a kid in class the other day, a kid was looking at him wrong and he's like, what are you looking at? I'm gonna knock you out. And they're going at it in class. And the teacher's like, Christian, I'm trying to figure out where's the motivation going to come from to apply these skills. Great. You're great at teaching skills, Christian, but where does the motivation come from? How would you answer that question? That's the toughest question I've gotten in 27 years. And this was my answer for about 25 years. I would say, all you can do is teach kids life skills. The inner motivation is different from everybody. And the inner motivation has to come from within. And people would go, yeah, we're aware of that. But why don't you stop and think about where does resilience come from? Well, several years ago, I was doing some work in Baltimore, Detroit, and I kept coming across a population that I really don't work with as a social worker. These are people with high trauma that are thriving. Everybody catch what I just said? You might miss that. These are people with high trauma, but they're thriving. Clinical social workers like me, we don't study that population. We work with people with high trauma who are hurting themselves and others usually, or put, you know, they're just in a difficult situation. They're court ordered to see me. That's the population I work with. But I would come across these kids. I remember these two young men in Baltimore. And by the way, one of them, not the exact young man, but he grew up in that exact situation. He's the governor of Maryland right now. His name is Wes Moore. If you want to hear an amazing story, look up the story of the governor of the state of Maryland. His name's Wes Moore. He's a friend of mine. And by the way, Wes Moore was doing this before he became the governor of Maryland. Had the opportunity to speak with him at a lot of different conferences. But these were kids like Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland, who literally grew up with, you know, moms in prison, dad's an alcoholic, the older brother abused them. These kids take that anger and they use it as a reason to turn in their homework, stay in school, and start thriving. And I started thinking to myself, what are they tapping into? So I started looking at tens of thousands of these kids, and we started seeing four things pop up over and over again. And I want to highlight those things as I end this here. So this is what we found. And this is, I wrote a book on it called The Resilience Breakthrough. And it's interesting, the guy who's the co-author with me on my book, The Resilience Breakthrough, is Brad Anderson. He's the one that interviewed Stephen R. Covey. From his notes is what Seven Habits was written from, which became the most successful business book of all time. And he's the one that coined the phrase win-win. He heard me talking about these four sources of resilience, trying to answer this question where inner motivation comes from, quit his job and spent 4 years writing the book with me, The Resilience Breakthrough. So to say I had a support system is an understatement. He's like the Babe Ruth of intellectual property. And he said, Christian, you can come up with any theory, but unless there's data behind it, we're not putting it in the book. And so that's the great Brad Anderson. He's passed away. So I always want to take a moment and honor him. Again, I have an army standing behind me. I did not do this by myself. So this is what Brad and myself, we started figuring out. It was this right here is the first thing you have to be resilient. You have to have suffering. The second thing you have to do is flip the switch. You have to say to yourself, how do I use this suffering as a resource? How do I use this suffering as my best friend? That's the gateway to resilience. And so when I started traveling all the time, I started reading tons of biographies, and I started noticing the minute a person started to change, and I was blown out of the water because I thought I'd just hear positive psychology. If you go to Barnes and Noble and you go to the self-help section of any bookstore, I promise you, every book is going to tell you positive self-talk. And if you go to any graduate program in America, it's all going to be about cognitive positive self-talk, right? But when I started studying the human condition a little bit more in depth around resilience, if think about it, if you have something to bounce back from, are you going to have positive or negative emotions? I don't know about you all, but when I have something negative to bounce back from, I feel sad, I feel hurt, I feel angry, I feel like shutting down. That's the human condition when you have a trauma or a crisis to bounce back from. Well, in all these books I started reading, I remember the first time I read this, I was reading Christopher Reeve's biography. Everybody knows the story of Christopher Reeves, played Superman, opposite of me, tall, dark, handsome. His kids just entered a film about him in the Sundance Film Festival. I'm hoping to go see it here in the next little while. But anyways, what Christopher did is, he was suicidal, he was depressed. He said to his wife, I was at the top of the world. I played Superman. I've been in all these films. I'm this actor, producer, mountain climber, tremendous at horseback riding, gets thrown off the horse. He's paralyzed. And his wife says, look, Christopher, just stay alive right now for just me, for the kids. Hang in there. We'll see how you feel. We'll reevaluate. You can see what she's doing. She's just trying to keep Christopher alive. Well, Christopher takes his sadness, his hurt, his anger, his pain, and he starts channeling it into his rehab and makes a huge difference to the paralysis community. Oprah took physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. She talked about the anger, the rage that came from that, and that how she was going to use that to bring people together, to emphasize gratitude, to emphasize the human condition and unity. And I just started realizing, man, Nelson Mandela took 27 years of being in prison, and Viktor Frankl. I was like, wait a minute, all of them are maximizing their negative emotions. I spent 8 years in college and no one told me how to maximize negative emotions. They said, you got to get rid of them. And I started studying people with high trauma that are thriving. All of them were creating productive outcomes with their negative emotions. And it's going to literally say this on my tombstone. There's no law in the universe that says you cannot take a negative emotion and create a productive outcome with it. It is the most powerful thing I've learned in 54 years on this earth. There is no law in the universe that says you cannot take a negative emotion and create a productive outcome with it. So how do we take this from theory and teach this to kids? This is how we're doing it, is this metaphor right here. There's Christopher Reeves here. I got to flash through this real fast here. My hero, because I'm talking so fast, I left out half my visuals here. Let me just fly through here. All right. So it's this battery right here. So this is how I teach this to kids. And we're teaching this as young as third grade. I'll say to the kids, look, can you charge a battery with just a positive connection? What do you think the students say? No. Can you charge a battery with just a negative connection? They say no. We know the battery charges because the positive and the negative come together, right? So all of us, every single day, we have 40 to 60,000 different emotions. Just hearing me talk in these 50 minutes or so that you're going to listen to me, you're going to literally experience thousands of emotions. You're going to agree, disagree. You're going to feel maybe emotions from my life story, from whatever, right? So you're going to literally, every single conversation you have with someone, you're going through a gamut of emotions, 40 to 60,000 different emotions. And some of those emotions are going to be positive, and some of those emotions are going to be negative. And by the way, when I speak on college campuses and they hear me talk about this, these people with PhDs in psychology say, Christian, please also point out they're just emotions. There's no such thing as positive and negative emotions. They're saying, no, we get why you scream about it because you're working with children. But adults, we need to understand this is just the human condition. We have a gamut of emotions. So I want to be really careful labeling emotions. They're not necessarily positive or negative. That's the academic view. I just want to, there's some real reason why that's important. But when you're working with children, it's important. They see the world and either I feel happy right now, I feel sad right now, I feel lonely, I feel engaged or whatever. So that's, for children, it's important that we understand that. So anyways, so so for me being here right now, speaking to y'all today, if it was dependent upon optimism, love, peace, happiness, and trust, I wouldn't be here talking to y'all. I'm here talking to y'all because I was blessed to have Mama Jackson come into my life and show me what to do with pain, fear, anger. She would pull over in front of my elementary school. You probably saw in that video, the plate wrapped in tinfoil. Mama Jackson would fill this plate up with food because she knew I didn't have any dinner the night before. She definitely knew I didn't have any breakfast that morning. So she would park out in front of my elementary school. She'd let me eat that food and she would say to me, look, Christian, I cannot get rid of your parents' mental illness. I cannot get rid of your parents' divorce. I cannot get rid of some of the poverty and crime in this neighborhood. I can't get rid of the problems at school. I would tell her about these teachers don't like me. I can't read. And she would say, look, Christian, I can't change any of that. And you have every reason to be angry, but you have to use that anger as a reason to turn in your homework, to stay in school. And she would tell me, one day, Christian, you're going to impact millions of people. You're going to take the pain of this and you're going to create a productive outcome with it. You're going to use this as fuel one day. And that light, that fuel has never gone out of me. I never forget where I came from. I don't forget the pain. I don't forget what it's like to sit in school and not know how to read. I take that pain and I use it in productive ways. If you use it in productive ways, the world is your oyster. If you hurt yourself and others, there's $100 billion industry that will lock you up for the rest of your life. It's the same pain. It's the same anger. And you have a huge advantage. You have twice the fuel source to bounce back if you can maximize both your positive and negative emotions. Again, if you have to wait for positive emotions to show up, you're actually at a resilience disadvantage. Think about that. But probably most of the exposure that people get is only positive psychology. That is insane. We have to show, especially people with trauma, how to use the challenge as their best friend. It's interesting. I was speaking by the University of Iowa a few years ago, and some professors in the humanities department were listening to me, and I was lecturing on this battery, and they said, Christian, you don't even understand your own battery. I said, what do you mean? They go, do you realize we're humanities professors? We study this human condition. We figured out that the greatest films, the greatest music, the greatest art, the greatest plays, the greatest books, the greatest comedians, it's all examples of people taking their negative emotions and channel them in productive ways. I remember the first person they told me about, I'll never forget, they said, you ever heard of Hemingway? I hadn't read any of Hemingway's work, but they said, do you realize Hemingway, at the end of his life, they asked Hemingway, one of the greatest writers of all time, how did you write like this? And he said, I fell in love with this nurse during the war. He was hurt, falls in love with this nurse, never sees her again, never ever sees her. And he says, I took that heartbreak, that pain, and channeled it into my writing. Again, Nelson Mandela took 27 years of being in prison. You know, whether it's the play Les Mis or Wicked, or if you know the history of rap music, the history of rap music comes out of, or hip hop comes out of pain, the pain of discrimination, the pain of poverty, the pain of abuse, social injustice. And that's the history of hip hop. Hip hop impacts everything. Just look at your kids, it impacts the shoes they wear, their clothes. Everything is marketed almost through that culture. And it's one of the most powerful things. But some of the most powerful things on the planet are rooted in truth, in reality, and in pain. And that's the power of being able to maximize both your positive and negative emotions. And they said the number one funeral talk that people give is for someone's life is what they overcame. It's how they channeled their negative emotions is the number one funeral talk at every funeral. And I was like, wow. All right. So sorry if I get a little worked up on this battery right here, but you have a huge advantage. You literally have twice the fuel source to bounce back if you can maximize both your positive and negative emotions. Give you a real world example of this. The other day, I was in my house flooded, it's doing like $40,000 worth of damage. And I'm like, all right, Christian, you got to flip the switch. My son was crying, who caused the damage. And I'm like, this is kind of a crisis. We have the cleanup crew there. Water's coming in under one of the light fixtures, like I mean, more than a shower. It's just coming down. And I'm like, all right, let me try not to be a hypocrite right now. And okay, that's the challenge. I know what my challenge is. I gotta flip the switch. I have to ask myself, how do I use all this damage happening to my house in a way that doesn't hurt myself, doesn't hurt other people, in a way that's productive? So I said to the cleanup guy, I said, hey, as I'm standing under the water, I said, you got to get the internet turned on ASAP, because my kids got to have access to the internet. I'm joking, being funny. The kids start laughing. The guy who's doing the cleanup is like, you're nuts. And he goes, man, I've never seen anybody respond to a crisis like this. And I had to explain to him, I'm this guy, I'm the kind of one of the resilience experts in the US. And he goes, man, would you come and teach my employees how to be like this? And I was like, holy cow. So that helped pay for the clean. Anyways, but what I'm trying to say is I don't know of a situation where you cannot flip the switch. Me and a bunch of therapists were actually studying. Is there a situation in the human condition where someone cannot flip the switch? We can't find it. We've seen it during the Holocaust. Again, we've seen it during abuse, violence. We've never, ever, that's how powerful human beings are. We cannot find a situation where a human being does not have the opportunity or the ability to do that. That is mind boggling that a whole bunch of therapists cannot figure that out. So it's one thing to tell a child, we want you to maximize both your positive and negative emotions. But where does the inner motivation come from to do that? And I know my time is pretty much up right now, but I'm going to highlight these 4 things really quick, turn the time over to Cam. And Cam's going to go for 3 minutes longer. If everybody's okay with that, I promise Cam won't let you down. And so by thumbs up, give me a thumbs up if you're okay with Cam doing that. All right. I see y'all out there. I see y'all out there. All right. So there we go. All right, there we go. There we got some thumbs up. It's going. All right, all right. So here's the 4 places that resilience comes from internally. This is the prescription for resilience. The first place that it comes from is something called relational resilience. This is a picture of my 2 kids, Cooper and Carson. If I never got invited to speak again, I would go work in 4 different fast food restaurants because they need me, I need them. That makes me relationally resilient. So the more people who need you and you need them, that interdependence, not dependence, inner support, they're supporting you, they're not causing you harm. That has a huge, huge impact on your resilience. Mama Jackson was that relationship for me. Harriet Tubman, powerful, powerful example. She freed over 200 slaves on the Underground Railroad. When the slaves would want to turn back around, she would, they would hear the dogs coming towards them in the woods. They would see the lights coming. The real story, I went to a museum the other day. She had a shotgun, and she'd explain to them, if you turn back around, we're all going to get captured. And so she didn't lose one slave on the Underground Railroad. But why did she go to that extreme? It's because she knew at what level they needed her and she needed them. because of time, I have so many of these I'd like to share. Dick and Rick Hoyt, who ran in over 240 triathlons together. When he became the legs for his son, it completely transformed his life. Um, so the second place that resilience comes from internally is something called street resilience. And that's where you use any type of judgment, disrespect. I was told I couldn't go to college because of my learning disabilities. I was told if I write a book, I'd have to self-publish it. Everybody told me no, 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 no. The only thing I've ever heard my entire life is no. And you just don't accept those no's. You just keep plowing through. Well, when we started looking at tens of thousands of kids that were highly resilient, that had high trauma, all of them, 100% of them talked about street resilience. They all talked about using the pain of disrespect, social inequality, and past mistakes as a fuel source. It's the ability to oppose injustices. Fighting for a cause gives me a purpose, a focus, a motivation. You reframe the obstacles into opportunities and limitations into possibilities. And so that's what street resilience is. I was told by one of my professors, if you can get a college degree, my degree is worth less. He was so furious that I was on his college campus and I barely knew how to read and write. And I get it. I understand that was a little shocking for him. But it's funny, 8 years later, he had to teach out of 2 college textbooks. We're in the Introduction to School Social Work textbook under PBS, RTI. He had to actually lecture on my theories. Now, you might say, Christian, you're kind of bragging right now. No, I'm not. I'm being street resilient. You told me I'm not even good enough to be on this college campus. Now I'm in the textbooks. I have value. I had value before. And that's street resilience. And many of these kids are first generation college students. Many of these kids are overcoming poverty, discrimination, abuse. And these kids are literally all talking about this. All of these kids had to use street resilience to create opportunity out of trauma. Rosa Parks refusing to sit on the back of the bus is a powerful, powerful example of street resilience. Mandela, my favorite story of Mandela is he goes and gets the Nobel Peace. Sorry, let me back up a little bit. Let's talk about Rosa Parks. Real quick. Mandela, he becomes the president of South Africa, and the prosecuting attorney to seek the death penalty against Mandela. Mandela invites him to his house, feeds him a nice meal, takes ownership for his mistakes. And look, I messed up. I made mistakes. I've learned from them. I'm going to create reconciliation here in South Africa. I'm going to stand up to apartheid. And when they walked out of the guy's house, when they both walked out, the national media was there, and they said to the prosecuting attorney seeking the death penalty against Mandela, "What do you think of Mandela now?" This is a direct quote. He said, "He's the most saintly man I've ever met." And that's why Mandela's funeral was the most viewed funeral in human history. And it was because of his ability to take judgment, hate, discriminate, and say, I'm going to become a greater human being because of that. I'm going to bring more unity. I'm going to bring more love into the world. He's a powerful, powerful example of that. And even the prosecuting attorney showed his respect to Mandela. Abraham Lincoln running for public office 7 times and failing. What Cesar Chavez did for migrant farm workers when he's seeing they're being charged 50 cents for a cup of water. They would have these trucks out in the fields with these huge barrels on them and full of water. And when he saw they were being charged money, working in these fields, being paid very little money, that snapped him. And he said, you know what? We're going to unionize them, and the rest is history. Gandhi, Malala standing up to the Taliban. She said, until the man who shot me, until his daughter can receive an education. When Mandela found out that the guy in the Taliban who shot her, his own daughter could not receive an education, she said, I'm not going to be quiet until his daughter can receive an education. And millions of young women around the world are receiving an education now because of Malala. Michael Jordan getting cut from the JV basketball team. It goes on and on. So the third place resilience comes from internally is resource resilience. And that's where you maximize your talents, your abilities, your resources. For example, I had 2 skills growing up. I could talk nonstop and I could draw really good. Today, I make a living through nonstop speaking, taking everything in mental health and making it visual for kids. Helen Keller, powerful example of maximizing her resources. Probably my favorite example is this guy right here, Kyle Maynard, born with no arms, no legs. He wrestled in high school and college. He recently put rubber balls on the end of his stubs and crawled to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. Crawled up there. That's the power of just maximizing our resilience wherever we're standing. All we can do is be resilient as possible with how much money we do or do not have in the bank, a challenge our kids are having, the challenge we're having with a boss, the neighborhood we're living in. Resilience takes place in the effort effect. I've never reached resilience. Resilience is a striving principle. It's an effort principle. It's not a destination. You never reach resilience. It happens in the doing. It happens in the effort effect. You'll never land on resilience. It's impossible. And then the last one is rock bottom resilience. And that's in your lowest point, you believe in your ability to flip that switch. And you got to read my book to get the rest of rock bottom because I'm out of time. I want to turn the last, I'm going to give 10 more minutes here to Cam.
I'm going to have Christian stop sharing, and I'm going to share my screen of just giving you a brief view of the toolkits and some of the programs that we have. So for those that would like to get on a demo, just to kind of get, some of you have already, been using the program, you're familiar with this, you've been through a WhyTry level training. But for those that aren't, here's our WhyTry toolkit, where it houses all the resources, the most updated version of the program right here, where we have pre-built elementary lessons with a vertical alignment, as well as secondary lessons and our facilitators toolkit. In the facilitators toolkit, like Christian mentioned, visual learning, kinesthetic learning, auditory learning, using visual metaphors, processing metaphor guide, learning activities, journals, presentations, videos, tons of different resources to administer comprehensive resilience-based curriculum to students and teaching the skills of resilience with this toolkit that Christian was really mentioning heavily in his presentation. On a flip note as well, for those that are familiar with WhyTry and the toolkit we have for the WhyTry program, WhyTry has recently developed a new program called the Transformational Leader Toolkit. This is a program designed for leadership teams within a program, within a school, to be able to help you keep your focus and turn your focus to that relationship piece. One of the biggest reasons why I joined WhyTry is because of surrendering the one-up. This is the concept of building authentic, unconditional relationships with students. Sometimes there are some staff members that are amazing at it. Some struggle maybe with the harder to work with kids. But Mama Jackson, or Miss Jackson, Christian's, mom was a huge example of someone who surrendered the one up. And in my years of working in a detention center, I've also coached basketball at a high school and for youth in the community that I live in for about 7 years now. Surrendering the one up relationship is a huge key to why we are seeing success in states that I heavily work in with this program, in Tennessee, and in Illinois, in the Chicago area. And so if you guys want to get a glimpse of what this is, the Transformational Leader Toolkit, there's 9 pre-built workshops that are made for you as a leadership team that can be discussed around PLCs, team discussions, staff meetings, but these are pre-built workshops that you can deliver throughout the year, keeping your mind on being trauma-informed, improving relationships through awareness, right? Digging deeper into surrendering the one-up. And this is a training and a toolkit that we provide to be able to keep your focus on that surrendering the one-up relationship. The last thing I'm going to share with you here as I let you go is this QR code. I hope you guys can see that. Christian, can you see it? The QR code? Okay. If you guys scan this QR code, it will take you straight to my meeting link to be able to book a demo. You can get it on your phone and you don't have to schedule it now. But if you scan this QR code, you're going to have my meeting link. If you are interested in learning about our updated elementary curriculum for the WhyTry program, or the Transformational Leader Program, which is more of a staff development, a program designed to help staff better keep their focus and improve their skills on building unconditional relationships with students. Thank you, guys.